Thank
Morning.
you very much for being with us. So, what do you make of Sam Juma entering the race?
Well, it's obviously creating quite a crowded field. He certainly took us by surprise this morning. But, you know, it's part of what needs to be a big conversation, I get, in the Conservative Party about the type of leadership that they want. And the reason that I'm standing is because I think we need a different type of leadership at this time that's about more than shouting at the other side and bossing everybody about. We have to carefully put together the governing party into a majority that will deliver a Brexit deal, which is what I did back in January when what became known as the Malthouse Compromise emerged and produced a majority in the House of Commons. And so looking for a different way of leading the party that, as I say, carefully puts together the different wings of the party in an agreement that can then be presented to the EU as a way forward, I think is critical for us now.
Is there any evidence, though, that anyone else agrees with you that we want to have a different style of leadership in the Conservative Party? With respect, no one is talking about you as the next Prime Minister.
Well, I've got a number of supporters who have declared already, and hopefully over the next few weeks I will persuade people that that's the case. I mean, one of the things we have to get away from, I think, is a kind of bifurcated debate where, you know, the competition itself becomes a problem after the event, so that to put the thing back together again. And one of the problems that we've had during the whole Brexit debate has been this sort of binary move into silos. If we're going to find some kind of resolution before the 31st of October, we have to bring everybody out of those silos, put them in a room together, find some way to navigate towards an agreement that everybody can focus on to get us over the line for Brexit. Now, as I say, we managed to do that back in January. People as far apart as Nicky Morgan and Jacob Rees-Mogg and Steve Baker came into a room together. We sat down together over a big bowl of chocolate to get a deal hammered out. And I think, as I say, it takes a different kind of leadership to make that happen.
The greatest achievement of the Malthouse Compromise, again, with respect, is perhaps more in the compromise element rather than the Malthouse part of it. As you say, political opponents did put aside their differences. It's just unfortunate that they did so for a plan described by the European Union variously as bonkers and just nonsense.
Yeah, so when the compromise came out, it was at a particular time, I think, where the EU was very fixated on getting that withdrawal agreement through, as was the government. And so the contemplation of anything different was naturally going to be dismissed, right, because they wanted what they wanted. Now, the dynamic has changed since. And what we know now is that the withdrawal agreement as currently drafted will not pass the House of Commons, right? We know that the backstop within it makes that a cert. It will not go through. And so we have a duty to find a different kind of agreement. And what I would do as Prime Minister, you know, within as short a space as possible, is present a new type of agreement, a new agreement that we know would pass the House of Commons, and say to the EU, this is the deal that we want. We're not choosing no deal. But this is the deal that we want, and we know we can get a majority. And frankly, you have a duty, as we have a duty to respect your structures and democracy, you have a duty to respect ours. And that means that coming together as a group of great democracies, we have to find a way through. Critical to that will be, of course, dealing with the situation in Ireland. I was in Northern Ireland on Friday, talking to groups there constructively about how we might try and find a way through for their legitimate concerns, the complexities of that particular situation. And so a constructive leadership that puts together a governing majority, I think, will be critical at this time.
But just to kind of examine your strategising, I mean, the last plan that you came up with involved technology that doesn't exist yet. I mean, I'm still waiting for a hoverboard.
Yeah, no, that's not correct.
This time around, you're talking about the European Union, about coming up with something fresh. To do so, you'll need to compromise. You will need to give ground to the European Union. Where is that going to happen?
So, first of all, that's a common misconception, this technological thing. I mean, I know it took off in the press, but in truth, what the groups around alternative arrangements have pointed out repeatedly is that it relies on existing systems and technology, checks away from the border, trusted trader. There's lots of complexity in there, but nevertheless existing stuff.
And there's nowhere in the world where there aren't actually checks on the border itself.
But critically, of course, in the second set of negotiations that took place, both the EU and the UK government committed to this idea of alternative arrangements, and there is significant work going on. In fact, Mr Katainen, who's the Vice President of the Commission, gave a press conference back in April where he said they are specifically working on a new system for checks at the border in Northern Ireland to avoid a visible border. So there is work going on, and there is just a question of when that happens, not if.
Yeah, so where's the compromise?
Well, the compromise is that we, as I say, we will put forward an agreement that we know will garner support in the House of Commons. Now, there's possible to be some negotiation around that. Within that, we'll obviously have to have some kind of option of a transition agreement. But where we want to find agreement with the EU is because both sides want to try and avoid no deal. And we have to reverse the dynamic of the negotiation. So we put it back onto the EU that if they won't take a deal which is eminently reasonable, which has consent through democratic processes in the UK, then they are effectively pointing the way to no deal for us and for them, and that's something that's profoundly to be avoided.
So you think that the suggestion from Michael Gove's camp this morning that there could be a delay to Brexit of as much as a year, perhaps even longer than that, to get a deal done, you think that's a good idea?
No, I don't. I haven't voted to support any kind of extension to the process. Now, I think you could see a short technical extension if you needed it, if a principle had been agreed, worth the wait for an agreement that was in place. But I think we have to be honest with ourselves that if we get to the 31st of October without an agreement in place, then there are no good choices available to a Prime Minister at that point. And we will be on a hair trigger for a general election, which could be devastating for the country and catapult it into a sort of chaotic mix of who knows what. So we need to get a deal through, and the only way I think we can do that is by presenting something which fundamentally has the consent of the British Parliament first. And that means, as I say, a new kind of leadership that puts that deal together.
I mean, you are housing minister. I mean, there is something of a crisis in housing at the moment. Steps have been taken. I mean, don't you have better things to do?
Well, I certainly am spending a lot of my time on housing, that's for sure. And we did 222,000 new houses last year. The numbers for next year are looking good. And housing forms a critical part of my kind of three-strand programme, once we're through Brexit, of job, house, school, a new social contract, that these are the building blocks of a brilliant life. That we want fantastic, well-funded schools, secure homes for everybody, and a stable job that people can rely on, that you give those three things to most people and they will fly, right? So it's central, and the experience that I've had in housing over the last few months as housing minister is critical to making sure that we hit that big number of 300,000 homes by the mid-2020s.